Hey art friends, I have a quick tip for you today, and that is how to boil your shading down into 3 steps. And if you don't have a lot of time, you can do it in just 2. And if you're really trying to go fast, you can do it in just 1. So the reason that you would want to use this approach is if you have a short amount of time, so maybe it's a life drawing session, maybe you're outside, things are changing, you only have a minute to jot down what you're seeing, or if you are a beginner, this is really going to help you solidify your shading practice because sometimes getting all of the variations in there gets too complicated, it gets out of control, things look flat, they don't look realistic. If you follow these 3 steps and keep it limited to that, you're going to have solid shading and it's going to look more realistic than if you're trying to throw in all the variations and bells and whistles. If you've never drawn before and you want help getting started, I have a free 5-day sketch challenge for you in the links below. Check that out and that'll get you started. So step number 1 when you're shading anything is to define the shadow. This is the most important and it's also the most difficult. You're going to have to notice the difference between shadow and shading. Shading is where you may need to use a pencil or something to make things darker to show roundness, whereas shadow is where the light is no longer hitting. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look at the monitor down here at my face. And what I'm seeing is that on my nose on this side, right, there's a shadow here, but right in here, there's a little bit of halftone where a little bit of light is hitting. Or you can see this also right over here in this mustache area where I'm talking. It's kind of weird. There's a little bit of light hitting here. So that's a halftone. And then there's a shadow here under my nose, right? So that's the difference. So the first and most important part of getting your shading down is looking for the shadow. That means that you're going to have to know the difference between what is shadow, which is the absence of direct light, and what is shading, which is any time that you're using the pencil to make things darker. And there are things outside of the shadow that you may need to shade. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the monitor down here and use my own face as a reference. So what I'm seeing here, I'm going to point it out and I'm going to stop talking because it's kind of weird to point at my face while I'm talking. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's where the shadow edge is on my cheek. Okay, but there's a little bit of shading outside of there. Like if you look right in here, see where it looks kind of gray? That is shading, that is halftone. So you want to separate those. So the first thing I would do is I would outline this dark shape where it's actual shadow and where the light is no longer hitting my face in that area. Okay, so that's step number 1. Fill that in, just fill it in even. Don't look for variations in there, just one solid shape. Trust me, it works better than looking for all those variations to begin with. Step number 2, look for darker areas in the shadow. So the difficult thing is a lot of the time we get that first layer of shading and then we start to see variations in the shadow and we're tempted to lighten it, either to erase or to add light colors in there somehow, and that just wrecks the entire sense of form. So don't do that. Instead, look for the darker area in the shadow and then shade that in. That's going to make the other parts look lighter and it's going to make the form look more solid. So again, I'm going to use my face here. If I turn a little bit this way, you can see there's a little bit of a reflected light. I'm going to put my hand here so it's more obvious. See where there's kind of like that pink color or orange color hitting my skin? That means there is now a core shadow that we can see closer to the terminator, which is the edge of the shadow. So here's the reflected light right in here. So what I would do is all of this in there, I would go ahead and shade darker. And if I was still holding my thumb up here, I would shade that darker too. So look for the darker things that you see in those shadow shapes. That's going to give you a lot of variety. All right. Now, truthfully, if you have a sketch up to that level, it's going to be plenty of information. It's going to look just fine. But if you have more time and you want to keep going, my final recommendation, step number 3, is to go ahead and put in that halftone. So most of the time your halftone is going to be right next to the shadow, and sometimes it's going to be a longer halftone, sometimes it's going to be like a gradual fade into the shadow, and sometimes it's going to be really pretty sharp. So again, if I look at my face here, it is sharp here on my chin. Like it goes really quickly from shadow, tiny bit of halftone, and then boom, it's just light. Whereas on my cheek, I can't tell what side I'm looking at. On my cheek over here, it's a little softer, right? So it's just a little bit of a different transition. Sometimes you'll have little bits of halftone like over here. You can see a little bit of shading that would need to be done there. So you can put in those halftones, both the ones that are near the shadow and the ones that are away from the shadow. Make sure you keep it lighter than the shadow. Don't let it get so dark that it looks like the shadow. Keep it really delicate. I recommend when you're starting, just kind of leave it at that. Don't try and get every single thing that you possibly see going into your drawing, because it's very, very easy for it to become over-rendered. Keep it simple, clean, and abstract. If you want to take this even further and you want to get really, really realistic shading, especially if you've had a little bit of practice already with drawing, I have another challenge for you, which is the 5-day drawing transformation challenge. This one is focused a lot on shading and it will take your drawings to the next level. So give that a check. What is your biggest struggle with shading? Let me know in the comments below. What do you find you have the most trouble with? If you found this useful, give me a like. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.